Hello, Bob.
Hello, how are you?
Just clicking a few buttons here. Zoom is very insistent on all kinds of things. These,
Oh, they will confuse you next week by improving it.
yeah, exactly, improving it.
It's what was called used to be called innovation.
It was called innovation at some point, yes.
Oh,
So I'm just looking at Twitter and email here. A few people who couldn't make it made some notes. Let me just see 1 second, and then we'll go through doing some intros. Hang on, this was pasting here from Phil from Scholarcy. And okay, somebody's asking questions here, and I'm not going to start emailing when I'm with you guys, so I will unread that one, and here we are. I do expect a few more people, but not millions of people today. Um, so we can do introductions then. Going to remove this meeting notes.
I will be here only the first hour.
Okay.
I have something on second hour.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. Hang on, I'm just removing these note-taking things. We don't really need them. And here we go. Just going to check on Twitter one little last time. Excellent.
Hmm.
We are missing Peter. We are missing Mark Anderson. We're missing some of the regulars. Mark, I
Mhm.
think, had some problems today with scheduling. Peter should be here. But before we do introductions are always useful. Why don't we just do a quick where we are in the world? I'm in Wimbledon, London, England, and it's a bit windy outside. I'm going to go by my window layout because they're all random. Start with you, Bob. You're in San Francisco, right?
San Francisco, yes. Fifth floor of a tall building.
Fantastic. And we have two Carls, so we're going to start with a new Carl. Hi, Carl.
Morning. I am currently in Starkville, Mississippi. I'm at home right now, so I'm a few miles away from the university.
That is just super cool. We've had quite a bit of contact with the coasts, and now it's a little bit more inland, and that's yeah, that's awesome, brilliant. And we have Chris. I really couldn't hear that. It
Yeah,
was a bit garbled, I'm afraid.
I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Oh, back to
And
the
I'm
coasts.
this.
Excellent. And your names were easy. I'm going to try juries.
Mark. Oh, there's
It's
Mark.
close enough. Yuri, I'm currently in Spain at the border with Gibraltar. It's 10 minutes away from the coast of uh, Mediterranean Sea.
That is really cool. Where are you from? Are you from Spain?
No, I'm based, like, I'm from Latvia, but I'm based in Germany, Berlin.
So basically all over Europe. Okay, excellent. And Andrew, you are in the Pacific Northwest, aren't you?
That's correct. Yeah, about 45 minutes north of Portland. I'm in Washington.
Yeah, so for the benefit of people who don't know, I work with Andrew through a Sloan Foundation grant. Dini Grigar is my co-PI at Washington State. And Andrew used to be a student, now he's just a professional. How boring. And it took me 7 months to realize it actually has a Washington quote, as in from the musical Hamilton in it. You all know Hamilton, obviously. I'm assuming. Anyway, there's a great little song in there, Washington on My Side. So, Andrew, thanks to you and Deanie, I got Washington on my side. So, anyway, huge for me, probably nothing to anyone else. And then we have Carl.
I am in Alexandria, Virginia, so just south of DC.
Excellent. So, we got the East Coast covered. And Mark, you are, of course, as you say in your name title thing.
Yeah, I'm down on the south coast, Portsmouth. So if I look at jaded, I've just been driving for about 5 hours on the motorway.
Your eyes
And
do
I'm sort
tell
of
that
coming up
tale.
north, so I'm a bit blown out.
Very glad you're here, Mark. And for today, for so far, Peter.
And I'm a little bit less than an hour north of New York City, overlooking the Hudson River in New York.
Excellent. I'm just going to see if Fabienne is joining us. Boom. Okay. So that's all very useful. And today we're going to be talking about document formats. I'm glad we have new minds in on this, but yeah, we might as well start with brief introductions then, now that we know where we are. Bob. Oh, we can wait if you are still chewing, Bob. Don't worry. Sorry, I didn't see.
Are you
brief,
Are you asking me a question?
yes, a brief introduction, please.
To the problem. The problem is
No. Brief introduction to who you are.
Oh, well, well, I'm a emeritus senior researcher, Stanford University, 27 years. Before that, I founded and ran a company for 15 years, a startup, international consulting company. And before that, I was at Harvard and Columbia.
And one of the many things Bob does and has done is amazingly massive, incredible murals, which we're now finding really, really interesting to view in XR. Hi, Fabienne. We just started with introductions. We've done the location, so you're going to have to do location and introduction when we get to you. I'm actually next on this screen. Oh, Dave Duror is coming. Excellent. Hi, Dave. Good timing. We're just doing some introductions. And most of you know I'm interested in the future of text. My colleague is Mark Anderson. We managed to graduate, both of us, from Southampton. And I do this in many ways, and I'm eternally, exceptionally grateful for you guys to be here today to talk about the substrate of text for the future. So just massive thank you as an introduction from me. And then Carl Arthur. Actually, Carl, how do you prefer to be addressed? Carl Arthur, or how?
Carl is fine. I use my middle name because my dad and I have the same first and last name, but I'm not Junior because my mother insisted I have a different middle name.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Wise decision.
Yes, especially with two Carls in the room. Yeah, so Carl, please introduce yourself. We met on Twitter. It was, I had followed you, seen your work, amazed and impressed and happy to see your work. And then Andrea said, you really should talk to him, and here we are.
Okay. I am a computer science master's holder. I finished my master's degree about 3.5 years ago at Mississippi State University. And then I went to work for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers making virtual reality simulation software. And I have, as of January, I have left that position for a myriad of reasons. But I am now back at Mississippi State working on a PhD, and my dissertation experiments are focused on text entry in VR. When I was doing my master's, I was focused on VR locomotion, as that was one of the biggest first problems that VR had, and it's still an ongoing issue. Text entry, I think, is a bigger one. So that's what I'm working on now.
Of course, I muted
Yes,
myself. How fortuitous is all I was saying. Yeah, no, excellent. And actually, guys, if you don't mind, while we're doing these brief introductions, if you have a Twitter handle, please put it in the chat so that we can all have a brief look at what people are doing, because what Carl has done with hands and stuff is just so relevant to our discussion. It's just super, super great to see. Chris, introduction, please.
Yeah, I've been on hiatus for about the last year or so, but been following a lot of AI research lately. Kind of looking to next career steps, whether that's going to involve that or not. Trying to make sense of the chaos that's in that field, but also still trying to renovate some of my old independent research in light of new directions in the career in the industry because of that. So my old project was called Intro Central. It's a decentralized content address graph data model and sort of renovation of semantic web ideas for kind of a post-web architecture, I would call it, which I think is more relevant with AI now because of agents being able to be equal participants at some level, building the graph, whereas semantic web required a whole lot of human annotation that was just completely intractable in the marketplace, I think.
Yeah, good timing. Perfect. Yuri.
Yes, hi. I am software engineer by education, and then I shifted tracks to user experience design, which I do to this day. And in my free time, I'm trying to come up with ways to get rid of PDFs and convert them to something more readable and legible. And yeah, that's probably the main reason why I'm here. And I'm interested in text and its future.
Perfect timing. In our community, we have dealt with PDF a lot for the simple reason that that is the substrate for academia at the moment. And we have always acknowledged it is far from ideal. And now, personally, I feel a tipping point has reached where we need to go far beyond. So yeah, really great that you're here. Thank you. And Andrew.
All right. I'm a WebXR developer for the Sloan grant that Frode has mentioned earlier. So I'm the one behind the code for all of our prototype experiments where we try to read and explode documents inside of the web, specifically inside the headset, of course.
So Andrew, that's useful for everybody, and of course I know that as most of us. Can you spend a little bit of time explaining your general interests? Pretend we haven't met before.
Well, I do a lot of stuff because I'm currently a freelance contractor. So I do, of course, a lot of WebXR work for several of my jobs, but I'm also a game designer. So I come to this from a bit of a different perspective. I see things for more of how to keep users engaged and how to make things intuitive rather than just the kind of the thinker side, which is well covered by my colleagues in this group.
Perfect, perfect. So yeah, wonderful. And Carl.
I work in the U.S. federal government, the General Services Administration, addressing 508 issues for people with disabilities. And I'll post a link. There is actually a whole XR access initiative going on that certainly want to have people be aware of that. We actually just have a LMB memo came out. We're actually trying to move to HTML first, so getting away from PDF at the level. So good timing on all this, and look forward to see what's going on. And been here in a while.
Yeah, and good timing. And Mark, we're going over to you. And I just want to first pay a little respect to you and Dini, who both have been jumping up and down, screaming no PDF in the most eloquent way possible. And I'm very, very grateful that we've done enough work around PDF to be able to seriously engage with throwing everything away, so to speak. So, Mark, please go ahead and also thank you.
sorry, is this just general interests?
Well, general interest within the field.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Well, yes. I certainly, one of the things I've taken out of the XR is the unsuitability of a lot of our storage formats for basically for remediating text, because the real lesson of XR is that you want to use it in a way that isn't the dominant medium of the last 500 years. So we have systems that are totally optimized for print, and we're not using print anymore in that manner. So I've been interested in that. I'm also working with a UK academic organisation looking at better reuse of academic data. So that's a part of which is getting a better tie-in between research and the actual research data, because very few, sadly far too few, sort of graduate researchers really understand the connection between the two. So most do the minimum requirement to get through whatever stage their organisation, puts upon them, rather than to see the data as just a wider part of the information that their stories tell, that in the papers they write. I'm also about to revisit my work on transclusion and reuse of information in Wikipedia, about 10 years on after the original one. I'm not taking any bets it'll be any better than when I last looked, but it'll be interesting to do that again. And that's sort of about where I am at the moment.
Thank you, Mark. And Peter.
Yes. Well, basically, I'm a lawyer programmer, computer science hybrid type, and I tend to focus on programming languages and looking at the linguistic side of things. So if there's any parsing to be done, those kinds of issues are primary interest to me.
Thank you, Peter. Also, Peter is a long-standing member of the community for forever and ever. Fabienne, I haven't seen you in forever, but I can see through this bad camera connection. You have got a tan. How was your holiday, first of all?
Well, I'm glad to be back, but I also was happy not to be here. It was a good time. I did take a little teaser, a 360 video on holiday that is related to the group. I hope to do a little prototype on this and to show you all and even make you try if you can relatively soon.
Yeah, I've seen some screenshots and such like, and I very much look forward to that being introduced to the community. So for you new guys, the protocol with the community is very simple. Show up when you feel like it, right? Leave early if you have to. Obviously, bye is fine, but we all have different obligations. 2 hours a week is a lot of time. So if you can't come for a few months and you come back, you'll get amazing demos from Fabian and others. And if you have something to show yourself, whether it's a working demo, a screenshot or something, we are the community that really loves to discuss these issues. Today is about document formats primarily, but yeah, just keep that in mind. But Fabian, you haven't actually said who you are and what you do in general. Please do that.
I will also not do this, and I will do it through another way. So I'll show you books and gadgets that I think represent who I am and what I do, including some during the holidays. So the notebook, A History of Thinking on Paper, which I quite enjoy. Architecture, prefab and modular. A VR headset or XR headset, because the idea is basically the intersection of both, because I've been taking notes on a wiki for 10 plus years now. And I feel wiki is fine, but if it's behind flat things like this, even e-ink or whatnot, it's not the full thing. So my motivation for being here and for sharing prototypes when I can is because I think text is fundamental in doing things, from 3D printing to philosophy to discussing. But I think text, as the way a lot of us are used to, let's say black on white on paper, is outdated. For a lot of usages, it's outdated. And I don't really know how to do it. So I keep on trying through dozens of prototypes for myself, for the European Parliament here in Brussels, for UNICEF in the past, for startups, for quite a few, and also like volunteering for kids in Challenge School in Brussels, where I basically bring a bunch of headsets and like a little Raspberry Pi Zero like this to show them that the metaverse, quote unquote, and a lot of, to be a bit more direct, marketing bullshit around very trendy words are actually implementable. You don't need like big tech and billions behind it to do it. It's probably not going to be as fancy, but the essence of it is going to be there. So a constant goal of prototyping and showing that high tech or deep tech is fascinating, but doesn't have to be out of touch with how people can change it to their own need. So yeah, that's me and the motivation behind what I do.
Thank you, Fabian. And Dave, on my screen, you are next.
Hi everyone, thanks Fred. I was just looking around for a prop like the previous introduction, but I'm in the wrong room. Dave Durer, I'm been involved with this community for a very long time. I was doing hypertext before the web. My role now is in the University of Oxford. I have the title of Academic Director of Digital Scholarship. I'm partly in engineering science, and I'm more than half in the humanities division. So, for example, last week we ran our annual summer school in digital humanities. We had sort of 100 people in person internationally and 100 people online. We've been doing this since 2011. The new sort of workshop that we introduced last week that I was responsible for was on AI and creative technology. And my particular sort of contribution in that area, and reflecting my personal research interests, are in AI and music. And actually in that work, I have some really practical needs for some of the things we might be discussing today, which is why I'm here. What I've done in the past is set up interdisciplinary centers. So this activity I've just described, I guess, is one of them. I also set up a centre at the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester, our Northern Conservatoire, called Practice and Research in Science and Music, PRISM. And I was one of the founders of the UK Software Sustainability Institute, the body that's been running for many years now, supporting software sustainability across higher education in the UK. We invented the notion of research software engineers, which has kind of caught on. That probably reflects my interests. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect, Dave. Thank you. And Eric, it's been a while. Good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you. Yeah, I was a few minutes late, so I missed a few of the introductions, but it's so nice to see so many of these familiar faces from the symposium in, what was that, November?
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah. Well, anyways, I'm a software engineer and CTO of a company called Seed Hypermedia. Last year and in previous years, we were called Minter, but we're now Seed. And we are trying to build a decentralized publishing system where it's a desktop application. You can collaborate with each other directly without any middlemen involved. So it's peer-to-peer, but you can also publish to the web. And if you're willing to pay for a web server, like, of course, there are some advantages to that. And yeah, it has a lot of the attributes that we've been talking about when it comes to like the future of hypertext systems, such as, the ability to transclude, the notion that you need to have permanent data. So when you reference somebody's work, they can't just go and change the content there, which is one of the scariest parts about the web. Or when you reference something, it's not going to be gone the next day, which is really devastating when you look back at old content on the web, how many broken links there are. It's just so it's a huge tragedy, and we're trying to build infrastructure to address that. And yeah, I'd love to talk more about it, but I don't want to ramble on because I could talk about it all day and take up all of our time. So, but I'm happy to answer any questions and talk about what we're building in more detail.
Yeah, perfect, Eric. Thank you. Rob, I'm not sure if you are actual turtles today or if you are lurking. If you're there, it'll be very nice. I can start your introduction. Rob has many backgrounds related to writing, technical writing, but also science fiction. He wrote a book called Portal which Andrew has worked on aspects of for. Is that right, Andrew? You worked with Rob on something. Why don't you just speak for me, because you know what you're talking about.
Are you saying I speak or Rob speaks?
I think Rob may have stepped away for a second, so if you just mention the current.
Well, yeah, the Portal project you're talking about there is from an older novel that he wrote called Portal: A Data Entry, which is a novel of his game, his hypertext game that he published. It's a brilliant piece. If none of you have seen it, you should definitely check it out. And the project that Fro just mentioned, I was a assistant and an instructor for a class of students who were working on recreating kind of almost a demo of Portal inside of VR as a game. So we developed that in Unreal Engine, and that was last year. Rob is still writing novels to this day. It's fantastic. Always publishing something.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Perfect. So, in starting the discussion, just a few kind of framings to see fires people up. By the way, feel free to interrupt either with the little hand or physical hand, or if it's important enough to speak. It's all very casual, but I personally believe we need some sort of a docuverse, not just a network, because servers go down. Whether it's because of DNS or physical things or whatever, of course we need a network, no question. But there isn't, to me, a reason why things should be away. A lot of it should be with you. So if you have an academic document in whatever form that might be, you should be able to open it, read it, interact with it, own it. Not worry that someone has changed it, not worry that resources are missing. On that very basic notion, and immediately we go to Luxembourg.
Brussels.
Sorry.
Close enough.
Somewhere in Europe.
Yeah, somewhere in Europe. It's next door, it's true. No, it's just to share a little bit of a personal experience, very pragmatic. Also, it's actually it's on a holiday, not this one, but I tend to distinguish my quote-unquote normal life when I go to work and whatnot and holidays. And I mention it because sometimes, like with the Raspberry Pi there, just for the anecdote, it's not this one, but a 500 gigabyte of something that fits in my hand, not even like on a finger, is a lot of data. And for most of it, it's more data that we're going to write or even read in our lifetime. So that's anecdotal, and yet it's a lot. And when I go on a holiday, I try to not contact you guys, for example. I try to really be offline and think of other things. And the way I do this is not necessarily remove all the stuff I have read, but bring it with me offline. So I go into this habit every couple of months, basically, of gathering everything I might know or want to know or want to explore. And there are solutions for this, basically. And why I mentioned my anecdotal experience is because I also had a vademecum, a way to prepare for the apocalypse. It's a little bit grandiose and honestly a bit stupid because I didn't even use it for the COVID. So when I had a chance to actually use my survival kit, I forgot it, which is, well, this is a bit silly. But the point is I want to make a distinction between the normal use case, which is internet working, and the kind of cataclysmic use case, which is no internet. And in so far, since the internet has been up, it hasn't gone down. It has changed. And like I have, for example, the bag of the SplinterCon of how the internet is not what it was, and maybe it is splitting due to political challenges. But I want to say since our lifetime, since the internet has been up, it's not been down. And just to make the distinction, it's not the same to have a normally working internet and preparing for the apocalypse. In my experience so far, and I hope it always will be, it's been an interesting experiment, but it hasn't been as valuable as maybe I would have projected or imagined. So yeah, I don't know if it makes sense, but kind of normal use case versus apocalyptic and some wasted investment in high-tech solution. Just what I've had experience.
Just pasting in another email reply here.
I will. My hand is up, and I'd like to say a couple of things. The reason I tuned in on this conference, on this meeting, is that I've been interested in formatting for a long time because in part it's a partial solution at the level of actually looking at things, at actually looking at documents, and so I'm not in the coding business at all at the coding level of the question, but at what it is that I look at every day. And what I look at in academic documents is terrible. I cannot find easily, quickly. I mean, I really mean quickly. By scanning, I cannot find the big idea in almost any document. In almost any document that you guys send, I cannot find the key idea. Secondly, I cannot find the structure of your thinking. Your text just runs on and on and on and on, like I'm talking right now, on and on and on and on and on and on. There's no structure to my on and on and on and on. I can't see it in your documents, and that wastes about 10-20% of the time of scientists. And the third thing that I think is really important is, and I wrote a book on this 20 years ago, now out of print, called Visual Language, which says basically that the combination of words and visual elements, as in diagrams and cartoons and all sorts of things, are the future of text. And earlier on in one of the earlier volumes of The Future of Text, I wrote that we need a 1,000,000 diagram project to figure out how to do this. How to do diagrams. I've contributed quite a bit and have some unpublished stuff on it. I'm too old to do the project, but at least I wanted to announce that somebody ought to do it, or some bunch of people. It's really a bunch of people who ought to do it. And so take a look at that. And that's what I'm interested in, is how you can make my life easier, quick, so I can find your big idea and decide whether I want to get into it a little more. And then if you want to get into it, I want you to see your structure of your thinking. I want to see, put it on in formatting terms, the structure of your thinking. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Happy to answer any questions, of course.
Just want to say, first of all, where can you find Chris Guttridge's work? That's a good, I'll answer that in a second, but in the community, it does seem like there is a conflict between Bob here. By the way, Bob, I agree with your perspective. I also want to present structure and on highlighting, versus academic writing, which is very much, oh, don't you dare bold anything. What are you doing? Are you mad? That kind of thing. We need to try to get to somewhere new. And by the way, the kind of documents we're talking about today really are important documents, right? We spent a lot of time in these communities talking about what kind of document. Writing a shopping list is very different from writing an academic paper, writing a research report, and so on. So we're talking about serious documents for whatever use. Hi, Brandel.
I'm talking, by the way, Florida, I'm talking about, for example, biologists, some 2 million or so of them around the world, who now cannot write, cannot communicate without extremely complicated diagrams.
Yeah, no, that's also, of course, a very, very important consideration here. The inclusion of visual components with text, absolutely. Now, just to kind of finish the introduction, the second half of it is we're very, very lucky in this community to have incredible people, including you, Bob, who have a long history of thinking of these things. And there have been two conversations coming up over the last few months that I just want to really briefly relay to you. One of them is talking with Vint Cerf, who's been hugely supportive of what we're doing. And he talks in a beautiful science fiction level of having a library where you can do everything. It's very inspirational, it's very connected. And of course, we're utterly not capable of delivering on that. And then the reason I sent out the message in email and Twitter this morning about, okay, we have to get beyond it. This weekend, I spent a lot of time in the Vision Pro headset. I was traveling, that was part of the excuse. So I have a reader, a PDF viewer in there as the basic metric that I built just to have the most basic thing. And one thing we have done is you can choose to have a single page, double page, or all of them. So you can have the entire document like this. In principle, it's a really neat idea. But when you really read, you really want the text to be kind of foveal vision. And that brings up the other name drop, Bill Atkinson. If you don't know Bill, you probably want to disconnect, just kidding. He not only wrote 2/3 of the original Mac code, he also wrote HyperCard, of course. I asked him, why did you choose to have screens rather than scrolling? Of course, the original Mac was a 9-inch screen, so he could easily go for scrolling. And he replied that he just wanted to be in simple, digestible sizes. That is so important. So while we can do massive displays, it seems to me, and it's really fun to see your heads moving in different directions, by the way, probably what we want to do, and this is something Andrew's done so many prototypes of, is figure out a way to have a really readable small area, even in a virtual environment, for real clear reading, but to use all the rest of it for context, whatever that might be. So I really look forward to hearing what that might be for you guys, something, or if you disagree, also awesome. And then maybe return later on today about how the heck should we store it? Now, a final comment from me on this. One thing we talked about in the beginning with these discussions half a year ago was a naive notion of storing every single object and its location in space. That may not be necessary. Storing what kind of object it is so you can choose where to put it based on that in the future might be useful. Now, Peter, and then I'm going to give the mic over to Brandel for a brief introduction. I have a feeling Brandel wants to say something else as well. But since you have your yellow hand up, Peter.
Okay. Before there was the mention of how biologists are requiring very, very complicated diagrams. And one really ironic thing I've found is that a lot of times when I'm looking at a paper that has hideously complex notation in it, it'll be easier to parse the LaTeX source code of the paper than the typeset version of that code if I'm not familiar with the notation system being used. However, of course, LaTeX is not intended to be used by an ordinary end user, so I think it might behoove us to consider a end user friendly and highly accessible description language for formatting at a both a semantic level and then a detailed description of how the notation should appear. So imagine I have some type of notation. I'd have the type of notation, then I'd also have a description of what that kind of notation means so that you could follow that link and get hyperlinked into, well, when we have a radical sign, it represents this kind of an operation. Then independently be able to access, here's how that should look, as opposed to the underlying semantics of what's the function that this notation represents. And that would make it much easier for people who aren't coming from that subdiscipline. Even within a given discipline, you'll have variations on notations down to the individual research group. And that can be very daunting for anyone coming in from the outside. So even though we have this beautiful notation that very tersely represents a complex idea, if you can't textualize that idea, it isn't anywhere near as valuable as it might be. And of course, the added benefit for this would be accessibility for anyone having to work with a screen reader, because screen readers are not designed to be able to parse, even say a bitmapped rendering of some hideously complex mathematical expression. Although there are some systems coming out now to try to help people write LaTeX by recognizing penciled notation of the equations, and then they'll actually do a visual recognition on the notation to turn that into the commands for the typesetting system that would generate the formal typeset variant of the symbolism being drawn on a little sketch pad. And that's good for things like, find the correct code to represent some symbol that's off on a distant plane in the Unicode set where it isn't directly represented on your keyboard or in your software version of the keyboard. So you don't have to go in and go searching to try to find that notation. So that's an interesting set of tools, but we might want to think about trying to build that kind of functionality into any design and document formats that we have going forward. So you'd want to factor out the semantics, a description of how the notation should look, the driving code for whatever typesetting system was used to produce the thing, the bitmap high fidelity representation of the thing after it has been rendered to make sure that if the underlying typesetting system breaks, you can still see it as it was intended to be seen, and break these things apart as separate sub-documents so that they could live on their own. So the equation number 15 or whatever, or figure 17 from the paper could live as an independent document as opposed to being embedded with the additional typesetting to put that on the page where it should go in relation to other things that are on that page.
Thank you, Peter. And on the issues of annotation, that is a huge and important topic. We will have a scheduled meeting for that as well. I see Eric. Is it brief, or should we have Brandel do his introduction first, Eric?
Oh, yeah, I'd like to hear Brandel's introduction. I'm happy to jump afterwards.
All right, thanks, Eric. Hello, Brandel. Brandel from the East Coast, West Coast. Sorry.
West Coast.
Sorry.
I guess it could be the very far east coast of New Zealand. My name is Brendel. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that there was going to be a special function meeting today, but wonderful to see you all here, and great to see you again, Bob. I work on the internet. I work on what the web should look like. In the sense that I work on web standards at Apple, in particular, those that ought to have an influence and an impact on Apple Vision Pro. Sort of slightly independent to that, I joined this community a few years ago to try to cultivate a sense of interest and urgency in folks to understand that text in virtual reality, text in augmented environments has a particular challenges and particular opportunities, and that it bears investigation beyond the kind of the real-time systems that most people working in virtual and augmented reality and other things like that have been doing, because they come from games and film effects and that kind of thing. In additional to that, I'm a really strong devotee, adherent of Andy Clark's work in extended mind and predictive processing, these ideas that we think with our bodies and the things around us, and that there's really no difference, or that there's not a good way to cleave a difference between the way that we interact with things like books and other information systems and the way that we consult our memory. And so that's not to say that all books are like that, but that they can be, and that reading and writing systems have the opportunity, when well integrated, to be as impactful as learning itself, because you know how to use those things and the sort of the feedback loops that we can engage in with our technology, be it pen and paper being a technology, or something more sort of technically sophisticated in the form that we have with things like Apple Vision Pro today. So it's that sort of nexus of concerns and opportunities and things. I've done a lot of prototyping. I see some folks already follow me on Twitter, so you might have seen some of the things that I've done. But yeah, it's all in service of saying, what is information in space? What are the opportunities that we should get after? And what impact, if any, ought that have on the underlying technology itself? My position in Apple is I don't get to talk about secrets until they're out, but what I can do is I can carry over concerns and priorities from the public, from the academic world, and say, hey, how does this do that? What does that mean for our plans and our ideas? And that's something that I think has been really rewarding so far, and I hope to be able to continue it into the future. That's me. Thanks.
Great points. Thank you, Brandel. Very glad you're here. Okay, Eric.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, my first reaction was when Peter was talking about how we want to have like normal people able to use these tools without necessarily understanding all of these complicated notations. And I think, in fact, we should, even with something like LaTeX, like we should seek to purely focus on the on like a WYSIWYG experience, because for normal people having to worry about the fact that there's a difference in notation at all compared to the actual content, I think is can be a really big cognitive burden. So everywhere in the Seed Hypermedia app where we seek to use WYSIWYG everywhere. For math notation, we support LaTeX because we didn't have time to build a WYSIWYG math editor. That would have been a full-time like engineer's project just all by itself. But one day I think it'd be really incredible to have that where you can sort of drag and drop different symbols, and at least for the actual meat and potatoes of the content, it is all WYSIWYG. You can drag and drop content, and my next thought was sort of in reaction to Frog's interaction with Vision Pro and using PDF on Vision Pro, and I don't know. I think that one of the biggest things that we're going to get to is that interacting with text, with hypermedia, will be an interactive process, right? We come from the days of paper where there's only one interaction. You're flipping forward and back between pages. And now we have an endless opportunity of the different levels of interaction that we can support. So we can zoom into content, we can embed content in other places. And when it comes to something like VR, XR, we should be able to see, like, I like what you were saying earlier, Frog, where you center a certain amount of text, but there's lots of surrounding text, and lots of surrounding context, and you can interact with it. And the other thing that we hope to do, we've done it a little bit so far, but we have a long way to go, is make it so that once you've seen the world in a certain state, with certain context, you've configured a certain view of a very complicated world of content, you can snapshot that view and embed it in other places. And you can share it with other people, either just by sharing a link or by basically copying that link into another document. And you've basically embedded a little snippet of what you were looking at the time in some other document. And this is like just the beginning of what we're sort of trying to do. And I see that Horatio's here.
Hello.
Or
yeah, he is. He's just screening.
Yeah, I guess he's still getting connected.
Maybe him and Rob are out for coffee.
Yeah, but I would love to hear some reactions or even ideas on how we can do this thing where we're capturing a viewpoint and we're able to embed it and reuse it. But I think it's going to be so crucial to move away from rigid content, where even HTML in a certain way is rigid because modern HTML is like a web application, usually is like scoped to a window. But in the world of XR, you're not scoped to a window. You've got a whole environment around you. So the sooner we can move towards semantic content, then I think the better off we'll be. And that's what we've been focusing on when we're developing like the sort of permanent data format for like this hypermedia system that we're building. There's documents, there's a hierarchy inside of documents, and then there's a single block of content, which itself can reference other documents in increasingly interesting ways.
Yeah, good question. Because there's so many aspects of this, I'm going to try to be a bit of a focusing moderator. Primarily today, it's about document format that has to take into account a lot of this stuff. And I do think having everything inside a document is important, but it's really important we define what we mean by everything. Of course, it is very important equally to be able to reference external resources. And when you're talking about semantic markup or semantic having meaning, how we can provide the basics of that so that AI can help us with the rest, but in a way that we are in charge of and can throw away or keep. Yeah, Carl, please.
Just to quickly clarify, when you say finding the document format, is this trying to find the format of a single file or trying to find just the format at which we're encoding the information? Because maybe like a file format is super helpful, but also that's kind of like a older concept than thinking about things as like a big graph of linked data.
I'm old enough to have seen a lot of things die on the internet, Flash, web servers, and so on. Our book, The Future of Text, and for those of you who are not already in it, just by being here, you're extremely welcome to be part of it and contribute an article, and also to look at our symposium and be part of that. But what I am referring to is our book will be printed on paper, also metal, I hope, so that in 1,000 years it can be read. The reason I like PDF is that it is basically flattened, can be printed or not, and we have to decide how to deal with the metadata and connections. The reason, obviously, the reasons we don't like PDF are obvious. I don't need to preach to the choir, but I really am talking about a little bit of a discussion of such a thing as, should we just go to EPUB? You know, is it a wrapper we're talking about? Because right now, some of us have been working with the ACM. Mark has been sweating blood and tears, dealing with the arcane methods of encoding and just absolute craziness. And in my word processor author, I built a basic LaTeX export system. You know, you copy into templates, that kind of thing, and it will only work to an extent. All of that is fine. But at a certain point, we need to have an editing environment, like a super souped up Word with Photoshop in 3D. All of that great stuff needs to be developed by someone, and it needs to be viewable in XR, where you take a document, do this, that, and the other with it. But it still needs to be in a box to an extent. We don't want, in my mind, I don't want this world to be only like a Google Doc that is forever changing. At a certain point, you make a statement, you publish it. It should be, to a certain extent, frozen. It should be transportable, referable, and a thingamajig. But that thingamajig internally should be very, very malleable. Does that answer your kind of focusing question?
More or less, I think so. Yeah, like I think we need both properties of the Google Doc where things can change, but also a way to pin something with permanence.
Okay, cool. Carl, you sent an image and you have your hand up.
Yeah, so is everyone on the call familiar with Obsidian as a piece of software? So it's a way of organizing and linking documents with a very simple markup language. This is like what we're talking about here. It's basically a tagging system that allows you to just click a intra-document link and go to whatever the thing is referencing to. But the neat thing about Obsidian is it generates this 3D visualization of everything that's in that notebook. So it shows you spatially how related different documents or different concepts are. And those of us who have any experience with graph theory or can take a look at that image and see, oh, there's a huge gap here. So there's information here. These two like sort of sub bubbles of this graph are not very closely linked to one another. Otherwise, the individual things would be closer together. So in XR, you would want a way to navigate the web like this. You need a 3D way to get from point A to point B, because just using 2D text on a screen, using traditional hyperlinks, like something on a Wikipedia page, that's not super helpful for exploring related knowledge if somebody didn't explicitly link it to whatever page it is you're trying to ultimately wind up on. So having something like this where you can move through this graph with a VR locomotion technique or just by dragging the graph, being able to pick out one of these documents, have it pull up, have the tags at hand, and being able to rip off or copy like onto a clipboard that you're holding all of the relevant or related tags for what you're trying to get to can help you parse this graph a lot faster. And that is probably the sort of fuzzier search technique we're going to have to go to in order to do traditional web searching in XR, because the interaction is not as straightforward and as verbose as just mouse, keyboard, etc.
This is really important, Carl. Before I give the mic to Mark, just really briefly, the meeting I had with the community last week, most of it, I had the headset on, we're going through Andrew's code. And because I shared screen, I left it on for most of the time. At one point, I actually thought I'd taken it off, and I was really annoyed at myself because I was running a beta of Vision OS, which had a reboot problem. I was like, oh, for crying out loud, I'm going to have to wait on that. And I realized my headset was still on, but my hand, because of the lighting in the room, it looked like it was my actual hand, right? So we have crossed the threshold. It's not always there. There are issues. That was just such an explosive thing. So when you're talking about multidimensional views like what you show here, that is the entire point. I don't think there's any question about that. What it'll actually be, I have no idea, but it is so important to have this dialogue. So thank you for bringing that up. And now we need to keep talking about how to put these in little things so we can share them. Yeah, Mark.
I just wanted to pull together some threads, and I was something on my jot was thinking about encoding, which we've referred to. But of course, there's encoding in a technical sense, how we turn it into the ones and zeros the computer understands, which is not an understanding held by most of the people who will consume that data. Or is it the encoding of our intent, the actual semantics of the things that we didn't write? And the two don't necessarily, the one does not follow the other. And indeed, a problem I think consistently with technology is it's just been assumed that the latter falls out of the technology of the former. And I think we consistently show that that's not quite the case. And also the sort of sense of, we like the idea of things being intuitive, but actually rarely they are to the people outside the room. And I think, one of the things, for instance, Semantic Web showed this in droves. It's a really great idea, but turned out it was way too complicated for most people to wrap their head around. It's still a really valid idea. And the missing bit is people didn't go the extra mile of sort of bridging it across to the wider sort of human context. The points made just now about searching, one of the things I'm looking at in the PSDI project is it's very clear to me that the sort of queries people say they want to do are not going to be done by traditional relational database search, basically keyword matching, because for a start, people have no sense of the fact you get semantic collision, different meanings of words. They just don't, it's always assumed to be simple. And in fact, normally the thing they want to do is much more complex. And I just pick up one other point that I think comes into this intuition point, that very early on, you mentioned this thing about so academic style of writing and how we might signal intent. And I made the point in the sidebar of just saying, yeah, well, it's fine to bold something, but if you don't actually explain to the reader what you meant by bolding, they don't know whether you're shouting, whether you just pressed the wrong key. These things are far less obvious, actually, than we think they are. And the difficult thing with a lot of these things, and so something academic practice of writing tries to do is for those at least who've got to the level of who've got to the point where they have a broad understanding of that style, it gives them some handholds. But I totally agree with Bob's point earlier that finding stuff is way too hard. But to get to the sort of easy access he's talking about, it isn't just the tools. We actually have got to work on the human factor side of getting people to write in a different way, to think about exposing the ideas that they want to make accessible. Because if we record things in a manner that allow our sort of technical, sort of software tools to find those things in an unambiguous sense, then we start to get a massive lift of things like semantic web and linked data and graph theory and all that sort of thing. At the moment, they offer great promise, but the bridge to a much more malleable sense of communication that we do through our speaking and our writing is at the moment, I think there's a bit of an air gap there. So that is a challenge at the moment. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you for that. We need to go a little bit towards kind of documents and just a little thing. I mean, a bold generally means you're calling attention to this is an important bit. So I'm not sure if that is as contentious as other kind of formatting, But
the thing is, Fred, if I may, I don't think it's contentious. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. It's just that things are far less obvious to somebody else. If you don't ask them, if I do something and I assume that it is what I think it to be, I would say in my experience is all too often I was wrong. It doesn't mean that I did a bad thing. It's just I didn't get the outcome I wanted. And if the intent is to communicate, then the challenge is to just accept that the way we start to do things may far less self-evident to the reader than it is to the author. That's all I meant.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But kind of representing. Oh, can somebody mute who's got? Hang on, I'll do a bit of muting here. For the kind of thing Bob Horn is talking about, it is, academic writing is basically column, indent, heading, column, indent, heading, going on forever. Very few assumptions are made. As you know, Mark, because you and I have been working on it, one of the things I'm experimenting with in my own word processor author is what we call structure text, where you just write notes anywhere and it's bold and orange, but when you export, it's not there. However, it's in the metadata, so if the reader wants to know what the author had kind of marked up, they can. So there is an interesting opportunity here to serve Bob, who wants to have different sizes, bolds, and all of that stuff, and a more traditional reader. This is why we can't do PDF. It's such an important thing because, Mark, when you talk about bold, it's easy to argue, but your point is, of course, the intention from an author and the understanding from the reader don't necessarily connect. So the system through which we use our substrate should be able to help bridge that gap. Okay, Peter.
Okay, some of the best computer science textbooks I've seen will actually start off by saying, when we use this font in this manner, this represents input from the user to the system. Then we use this font to set the response generated by the system to that input. Here's the way we typeset an abstract representation of an algorithm. Here's the way we typeset that algorithm as a concrete expression in a specific programming language. We really have sort of a sliding scale of fidelity when we're dealing with documents. On the one hand, we might just be interested in the underlying text, and the author might not care whether somebody's looking at it in Comic Sans or whether they're looking at it in a beautifully refined Roman incisive typeface representation of it as it would have been carved on a slab of marble somewhere. At the other end, you have sort of the Platonic ideal where you want to describe how that content should appear if you were dealing with an infinite resolution canvas at arbitrary scale. And you want to control everything down to the letter forms, not even just like the type. I don't just want Helvetica, but I want the Helvetica that was released in 1972 by a specific type foundry that had certain quirks to it that weren't present in other Helveticas down the road. So you can have very, very finely grained. Then an orthogonal dimension to that is the actual underlying textual content that you're working with. And you might just want that as raw text, or you might want to have an actual grammar or ontology representing it. I think part of our problem is that the undergraduate level, we're not really educating students in these semantic technologies. Where's the course explaining description logics and ontologies that is pitched as a freshman undergraduate survey course to even let them know that these things exist? Let alone said we wind up waiting until somebody's in their final year of graduate school, and then they start trying to do a deep dive into, do I want to use triples or do I want to use quads? What's the better representation to use here? Which notation system should I use to express that? Am I using N3? Am I using something slightly different? Yeah, but if you don't give someone that landscape of the space that they're dealing with, they don't have the scaffolding to be able to pick up ideas and file them in their brains when they encounter them down the road. You have to give a skeleton that you can start to slowly build out on, and we're not doing that.
So that's an important issue, Peter. It needs to be able to, you need to be able to put a lot of stuff in there, so to speak. But I think talking about teaching people how to write is a little bit out of scope for today because it's just such an important and massive topic. And Chris has been very patient. Chris.
Let's see, I think it's a little bit stale, the hand here. So on the topic of sort of like living documents like Google Docs or published documents, I think it's largely a matter of how we conceive current systems. I think if you have a graph view where everything is hash referenced, it's implicitly published in a certain way, in the sense that you make a Merkle graph out from any given point following the references, that is unchangeable and can be viewed as a document in a certain view, in the sense that it's never going to go away as long as a copy exists somewhere. So it's in the idea, what is a maybe a container format, or I'm more of the opinion that everything should be decomposed into very small components in a graph view, and then you recompose as you need, which doesn't mean that you can't have a suggested view that is annotated alongside, but it doesn't lock anything down into like a single file or even a more rigid archive format, or even a Merkle tree where it's published at a certain address and like it's take it or leave it. It's more of a dynamic system where annotations are coming in from all angles, but you can collect them, and that is how you get that dynamic aspect.
It's not a simple this or that. Absolutely. Depends on where in the stage we're using it. Thank you. Carl Brandel, and then I put some questions in the chat here just to provoke.
Yeah, a couple of things. I did post it earlier, but next month there's this Accessibility Forum 2024, and that community has its mission to make research more accessible for people with disabilities. And I really think so many of the points we're getting to, if we can solve it, can a blind person engage with AR or XR things? That's really huge. The other thing, like Peter's earlier comment, remind me, there's so much innovation that's come about when people are trying to solve these things. Two that come to mind is, I believe it was called Window Eyes, but when I was at Department of Education back in the 90s, we had the challenge of everybody moving from DOS to Windows, and there were 7 different screen reader technologies. I think there was a guy from Canada who had, everybody raved of, like, said, this is the most sophisticated off-screen model. And unfortunately, he died suddenly, and the product kind of went away. I think it was Window Eyes. I'll have to go back and check, but that brings up a point of really how we get the code. I mean, getting code into open source. There's also a guy, last time I saw, he was at GW here in DC, but he came up with the OSTEP program, which was open source threshold escrow program. But the idea was that you put a value on your software. He was using like $100 million for WordPerfect, and it's like once you hit that threshold, the code becomes open, type of thing. So there is a transition, and people still need to be able to make money, and things. And that also brings up, I've been a huge fan of Jeff Conklin's work on dialogue mapping and things. And there was the Compendium software, which was open source, but there's Jeff's Cognexus distribution, and then Simon Buckingham-Shum and Open UK, they took compendium in a different direction, but I really see needing to get really taking a look at compendium again, and can we get that? Could that code get over into GitHub? Could there be like a distribution? Is there a kernel like similar to Linux that the intersection of the two, and then people could potentially build different distributions? And I know there's debate graph and all stuff, but I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Carl. Brandel?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about a couple of different things with regard to format and problems. So I live on the web. I sort of first got onto the internet in 1992, I think. I was a small child, but I was hanging out, for better or worse, and have done ever since. And I've been on it a long time. I've been working on it professionally since 2000. It wasn't until I actually started working really, really closely with browser folks, and that includes Chrome and Firefox as well, as obviously Safari WebKit folks. But I was absolutely shocked and terrified at just how dangerous the web is from their perspective, the vector of attack that it represents. And one of the things that is really important about the web and what it does, and more particularly what it doesn't do, is that it's not because people lack imagination. It's not because people want to ruin your fun, not always, but it's to do with the fact that it's manifestly unsafe to do things like allow people to tell what color a link is based on whether it's been visited or not, because then that can lead to scraping of various kinds. And so it depends on what you want to target with regard to a circle of trust within the context of a document and a document sharing system. But it's my understanding for many things, not just trust and safety, as Carl mentioned earlier as well, like accessibility is a thing that arguably the web does least worst. I'm involved in something called the universal scene description format, which is this 3D file format. If you've ever used AR Quick Look on iPhone or in Vision Pro, then those files are USDZs. And we're talking with Autodesk and other folks about what should happen to that file format in order to accommodate text. And the people who build CSS text come in and say, well, have you thought about this? And the answer is always no. So I think from the context of on what basis, on what foundation is it most sensible to construct a future of text, I would humbly suggest that HTML probably is, if not a good foundation, then an important measuring stick to go like, why is this here? And what do we want to do about that requirement? Is there some way we can exclude it? Is there some way we can say, no, that is not something part of the system? But that said, I would also say that as a distribution mechanism, the web is flawed, and link rot and the death of various things are important. I would say that they are actually orthogonal in terms of concerns. And another one that I would actually add, people talking about graphs and the ability to kind of compose things that way. Something that people are talking about within the W3C is the fact that Open Graph, the Open Graph protocol that Facebook, now Meta, released many, many years ago and has since abandoned, despite the fact that it's working pretty well, and maybe because it's working pretty well, is a really interesting candidate as a thing that could be picked up. And so people are talking about whether that might be a worthwhile thing for W3C to do, is to inherit that protocol and imagine a world in which structured data has the ability to be passed around within that OG system. And so I think that would be really interesting as well. The document fragment stuff that folks were talking about in terms of having a lot of individual things, one in practice challenge with that is that it kicks off a cascading chain of requests where you don't have the ability to resolve that, I know I need these 20 assets. And so the latency implications of that are significant. Leaving aside those implementation details, then yes, I tend to agree. Individual atomic elements are good, but something like OG actually has the particular advantage that it lets you lets you create structured queries for structures of data that if you have a well enough formed thing, then you can reach some distance into a latent structure and pull out at least a partially formed sort of network of things that a well apportioned server has the ability to give to you, which is not to say that it's the end of the story, but it gets you a long way in terms of reducing the number of hops, being able to improve the sort of the performance and the expectation and structure of how those things work. So yeah, so my main points are the web has had most of the problems that most ideas of documents have had worse than everyone else for the last 20 years. There have been a lot of incredibly terrible mistakes made. Most of them have been patched up and papered over. And so it's very much worth looking at that as a basis. But that I would also say that doesn't preclude alternatives, frankly, at every level of the stack in terms of, going from distribution. Fabian has done a wonderful stock and trade of downloading all of Wikipedia and sticking it on a thumb drive so that he can go off grid for weeks at a time. And I think that's really interesting. Ebooks often are functionally actually HTML inside as well. So there are a number of different things that HTML can be for, and a lot of different ways that you can kind of intervene on it. So yeah, that's all I got to say about that.
So yeah, so many things. I just put a link in to the page on what we're doing with Sloan a little bit, because there's a video. It's just a few seconds, no sound, 7 seconds, mocked up fake video of me sitting in a coffee shop. And the reason I want you to consider having a look at it is very simple. I am sitting on my laptop reading, and then I do a thing to have it in my virtual view, and it's a lot bigger and it's a graph. It's very, very basic. But the point of it is, we shouldn't necessarily try to do the same things in XR as we do on traditional screens, similar to how chance that the people in this room will be reading paper books in 20 years is pretty much 100%. Different substrates have different purposes, and at least within the digital world, it's kind of important. I feel that you should be able to move from medium to medium, still have your same quote-unquote document with you. And the affordances that you can get when you're on a headset versus a Kindle type thing will be, of course, different. So we should try to design for that. Now, I'm very much in favor of XR first. We optimize for XR. That should be our default native, and everything else is a graceful degradation rather than the other way around. So my kind of question to you now is, I'm sitting here on my computer writing about the stuff we had today. I want to include maybe a screenshot, maybe a 3D thing. And by thing, I mean it could be a knowledge network or an item, I don't know. And then I want to share it with you guys within the world as it is now. What should I ideally put it in? What would you like to receive? HTML, RTF, EPUB, Word, etc., etc. In addition to talking comments on this, can you type in the chat so we almost get a little bit of a vote just to make our discussion a bit more grounded for a minute? So I forgot about EPUB. Let me just be honest. Stefan Koitza, who has been in our community and writing a lot for a long time, came back with a very German message today saying, you guys are going in circles. Why not just do this, this, or this? I pasted it in the chat higher up. And EPUB seems to be, in an idealized sense, ideal, because it can contain a lot of stuff. To just be like Mr. Moderator for a second, is there any reason we just shouldn't say, hey, let's go for EPUB and just make it better? Okay, so Brandel, the HTML thing, I have an issue with that, and I know it's solvable, and that is, how is it better than it? Yeah, okay, so if I write up this meeting today with the screenshot and the things, blah, 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 and send it to you, the images and stuff will not be in the document unless we do a base 32 kind of hex encoding, all these fancy things, which then the document becomes kind of unreadable. What I like about a PDF is what is there is there. It's on the surface, just like a RTF or plain text. How would we deal with the images and stuff? Oh, Horatio, just on that one really briefly. I'm talking about making a thing, and you get that thing, and you comment on it, either as an annotation or you cite it, so to speak, and you comment your thing. For this kind of document discussion, of course we could, but I'm primarily talking about somebody making a public statement, even in a group, that is kind of frozen, and then we move on, rather than continuously editing Word or Google Doc. That would be a very important but different dialogue.
So, Frodo, if I understand you correctly, you're talking about the fact that a PDF can be a monolithic file, but in practice, most of the time, even the simplest HTML file will have the images and other assets sort of alongside it. So I feel like that's kind of a matter of accounting that's actually extrinsic to the document itself, because so I think it needs to be solved. I think it's an important problem. I think it could be solved by fancy conventions within, windowing and sorry, within Finder and Windows Explorer, to say a zip file that contains a thing is the same as a folder that contains those things, because then you can have a zip archive that contains things that can be referenced inside it. That's how the universal scene description format works today. USD is a pyramidal hierarchy, and a USDZ is simply encoding that, forcing that into a uncompressed zip archive, and it's incredibly effective. Apple does this in a number of places where there are, application files are secret folders, and people move them around monolithically, never being any the wiser. Package files are the same. So I think that there could be potentially stronger conventions and conventional sort of standards for how to approach the encoding of those things. But I also agree that specifically web archives is a thing that are not lovely right now, and I think that's a really interesting thing to pursue. I'll look into it. Nothing I will be able to tell you about it, but it's something that it's interesting to think about as being a particular shortfall, because, like you say, like a PDF does have those files inlined. In practice, it's about as gross looking at the page source, the document source, as if somebody had base64 encoded all of the JPEGs into the damn thing as well. Don't look at it. It's very unlikely to be any nicer than like looking at the bytecode of a PDF with a simple page with an image in it, versus looking at the HTML with the basics. At least everything outside of that image is going to be not garbage in the HTML, all things being equal. But yeah, so I take your point, and I think that's an interesting thing to focus on in order to make sure the web can do more of the jobs than it's doing right now.
So let's look at, so Dave says also is up for a fresh format. So let me put it this way, Brandel. How might we deliver an academic paper, not to say this all has to be about academic paper, as an example, as a USD file? How would that work? What kind of stuff would we put inside there for that aspect of it? Because why not? Why not use that kind of a format and put a simple thing in it as well? It's intriguing.
So USD was started by Pixar in 2015 as a result of all of the trials and tribulations they've had for nearly losing almost all of their 3D assets, from Toy Story 1 to 3 and a number of other sort of shows in between, on all of the challenges they've had from having these incredibly high demand workflows and these flaky formats that end up sort of dying with the change in wind, turning tides. And so it's a good thing, they've been building it on it and with it since 2015, and little by little, the rest of the film and VFX industries have kind of expanded their use of it as well. Apple and other folks have managed to convince Pixar to release it to the Alliance for Open USD to be the administrative body. So it's now publicly administered, rather than something that is sort of an open standard, but one where they have the monopoly on how the format actually evolves. So it's good, but it's still limited insofar as it's mostly for the things that Pixar was building it for. So it's really good at providing the low polygon cage definitions for subdivision surface-based modeling of the kind that you have for Moana's face and Maui's face. It's not good at text, and that's one of the things that Autodesk is trying to get after at the moment, because Autodesk does a lot of bolts and screws and the front of dredges and other things like that, and they really want to be able to annotate it with how many inches it is or other things like that. And one of the things that we have said to them is that, what if these need to be in Cyrillic, or what if these need to be in a bidirectional language where all Arabic tends to write numbers left to right while the rest of their text flow is right to left. And so you need to have a pretty sophisticated baseline of text manipulation in order to manage that. So to that end, if all of your academic paper consists of Moana's face, then be my guest. If there's even the slightest bit of text in it, then you're going to have a sad time today, unfortunately. So there are sort of capabilities that were jammed in, arguably, by Apple in 2019 through Reality Composer, which is now only available on your iPhone and iPad, where you can put text and you can put buttons and you can put stateful behavior in. That was removed from Reality Composer Pro in 2021, and maybe for good reason, is that it needs to go through a proper public administration process in order for people to be able to agree on the sort of minimum complement of capabilities and requirements that need to go into something like text, like stateful manipulation and interaction of the kind that would allow you to sort of look at multiple pages or be able to alternate things. And so USD itself is not ready to be the primary format for delivery. It is absolutely manifestly appropriate for putting the contents of like a 3D and intrinsically 3D thing. So if you want to have a 3D graph, you want to have, again, Moana's face, and I say that because I've repeated it a lot and it's funny to say the words, but also you may actually, if you're a Pixar, if you're Disney, wanting to talk about advances in open subdiv surfaces, actually want to have not just a picture of, but actually Moana's face in your academic paper. And for that, USD is more than appropriate. If you were to load that on your phone or Vision Pro today, then you'd be able to get it as an AR quick look. And if you play my cards right, then you'll be able to use that as an inline HTML model element that you have the ability to manipulate within the HTML page as well, which I've been sort of trying to do on the sly here while we've been talking today.
Okay, then I have so I'm just trying to export a picture to share with you guys, but my computer went funny. I'll do that in a second. I see here, Horatio, and please do a sales pitch. I would love to see that in a second. Absolutely fine to have sales pitches for things we're passionate about. That's very important. Now, Carl, the thing you're talking about, new format. So just a 30-second introduction to my PhD, which is, if something is important, write it down. That's the first half. Second is, don't hide it. So all I've done for my PhD is a PDF, and in the background, sorry, I was confused by text message by Carl, the other Carl coming up there. So imagine you have a normal PDF, normal layout, nothing you can do about that, but there's an appendix at the end of it describing everything using kind of BibTeX, LaTeX layout, and so equals so-and-so, right? So this automatically, if you put the BibTeX for the document there, means you can copy and cite the document without any errors creeping in. So that works, it's nice, tried it in author reader, fun. Also headings are encoded there, plus who authored them, because our book, The Future of Text, each level 1 heading is by a different person, so that's encoded in there. The references and other connections are encoded there, blah, blah, blah. We also want to put this graph on page 34, you click on it, these are the numbers behind it, so you can make it interactive. So that is me trying to hijack PDF. However, and let me just upload this image I wanted to show you, because it's very, very simple, nothing fancy about it. But the point is, how many of you, by the way, have used the Vision Pro? Or rather have not? Who's used it? Dave, have you had the Vision Pro in your head yet? Come to London. We'll pop it on your head, right? Because the thing is, the Vision Pro is many things. For me, emotionally, it is like the original Macintosh. It's an early machine. It's not the real thing, but just technically, it represents an incredible fidelity for reading. So let's forget Apple versus Meta in terms of politics or whatever. It's amazing. So why don't we consider this, considering we don't have a lot of time left and our plan is to change the whole world today, is that we find a base format, but we use the notion of file names for addressing. If someone wants to ruin a file name, of course they can do that, but they don't have to. The way that we use file names for addressing within the system I just described, Visual Meta, when you cite something, it copies across also the file name, which usually is unique if you're citing an academic document anyway. And that means that if you have the cited document on your computer, when you click on that little pop-up, which Mark made me do in the document, and you have the title of the document, if you have it, you click on it, it opens that PDF. Yes, I know it's still PDF, but how about we go further and we take the USD as being considered a equal, so to speak. And if they just know about each other by file name, there's nothing wrong with downloading both, right? If they're in the same folder or something, we can use the best of both worlds. I think there is a tendency towards being really scared of people changing the file names, but look at photography. If you organize your photos, very few people rename the photo, right? You use something like Lightroom to do that. You know, you give it something else there. So what is the feeling in the room for fun to consider one format for the basic block, another one for the extended stuff, and they are aware of each other? Oh, just finally, the image I uploaded, the only reason I want you to see that is there's headings on the side. And you can imagine in XR, you may want to stretch things really wide instead of PDF where you have to kind of stack things or in Word. So it's a really simple, ridiculous thing, but it's the notion of why should it be here? Why can't it be here and there? So many comments in text here. Any thoughts on the two format documents knowing about each other before we go into them? Mark?
I just sense, and I'm picking up on something that's put in the comments here, is that I suspect the problem really isn't the format. We're getting hung up on the format. The format's nice because it makes us feel comfortable that we have a standard. But what all our discussion is about is the standards are far less clear than we'd like them to be for all sorts of good reasons. And there are almost two, if not three, sort of disconnected parts. There's the sort of fidelity of the reproduction, so the passage across the system. So the document I send you, the thing I send you, turns up as the thing I thought I sent you. There is whether my meaning, so did my bolding in there mean to you what I thought it meant to me? And there is another aspect of sort of the encoding in this, partly in the way that one of the things that we're perhaps being slow to do is that when you look at the way things like AI are coming on, we're teaching it we're treating it a bit like a magic 8-ball on the side. When we talk about accessibility, I think we should be talking about machine actors as being another accessibility problem, because if they don't understand what we're reading, or we don't understand what their suggestions back to us mean, that's actually problematic. So those are the sort of challenges. You can store it in whichever sort of bucket or shape, which isn't to trivialize the sort of choice of format problem. But I think the thornier point is understanding what things the document has to be able to provide, or at least via dereferencing, be able to provide the person at the end. And it's actually it's a wider scope of things than it used to be. I mean, the ease of paper was, well, you get the paper and hopefully you understand it, but you don't get to sort of do much with it apart from tear the page out and make a paper plane. You know, it is what it is. With digital, there's far more scope for confusion, just in the nature of transmission. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Yuri, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Regarding your question, if I would be okay, or someone would be okay with two files, like distributing content as two files. I think that there is an overlap of content, and you will have two versions eventually, because you want to change one and then you need to track changes in another. I think that the same problem which you are trying to address here can be solved with, I believe that in early days of interactive web, there was no script tag, which substituted content like interactive content to something static when script wasn't available. The same is possible now with I believe Apple introduced some tags to allow VR content in HTML. So I would say that there should be one file and one format, and this file should be responsive to the device you have at the moment. If that was your question, of course.
I think that's a really important point. Thank you. The thing is, so from my own experience in my own system, I developed a word processor that's quite traditional. Then you click a button and then you got a kind of a graph view. They're connected, but not the same. And I had a version of my software for Vision Pro, and then there were all kinds of developments, so kind of paused it for a bit. And I'm wondering, do I necessarily always want to write in the Vision, or is it more important I can do the huge graph thing? So that's why I'm wondering, maybe you don't always take the entire document with you, but of course the synchronization issue, to simplify what you said, which may be synchronizing it too far, simplifying it too far, is an issue, absolutely. But then again, Peter had a notion for the visual meta appendix system that I developed for my PhD, where he said it should be possible to have extra appendices that you can delete. So we're now using that for AI. For instance, in the reader library, you can run your own LLM prompts that'll analyze the document and give you keywords or topics or whatever it is. This is something that's very useful, but of course it's sometimes wrong. And in the future, you may very well want to delete that and start afresh. So you don't delete the original data or metadata, you just delete this extra stuff. So the notion of being able to have a kind of a core thing, but things that are closely connected to it, is an interesting issue. A more simple one, of course, is our conversation today. I'm going to try to run it through Claude and distribute it to all of us. So please make sure I have your contact detail. So there'll be one YouTube video, and then there'll be one kind of summarized one. That's a very traditional two documents of kind of the same thing. So that's why I'm wondering, yeah, it's complicated. Anyway, Brandel can say something much cleverer. Please go ahead, Brandel.
I was going to say that thankfully Mark had put the provocation that I felt the need to drop in there much more constructively and concisely, which is what is in a document is up for debate. What's in and out of the sort of the constraints of a document in terms of the attendant data and possibly the process of writing it. All of those things are sort of up for grabs. If you talk to people who ever had to write a document before sort of everything was sort of down to the ground, assumed to be sort of digital throughout its lifespan, they had to do incredible amounts of rework. So Dine Gregar, who's been a really wonderful participant and leader of this group and its work with the Sloan Grant, said that she rewrote. Andrew, do you know how many times did she say she rewrote her thesis? 10 times? Was it more?
I believe it was more than that. I don't remember an exact number.
Yeah, but so she wrote it in the 70s, and she had to type it out or have it typed verbatim more than 10 times. And so when we talk about writing, we can talk about the sort of the proximal form of impacting characters into some kind of durable form, and in which case, right now, for better and worse, typing with a keyboard that is clacky and has the ability to find the home row is just better in every way at that. But that's not writing, that's text entry. That's and a lot of the time the what we've inherited, again, for better and worse, from Bravo is a view that conflates writing with text entry. And so when you're talking about writing in virtual reality, there's a lot of stuff that Dini did with her thesis that happened on copy 27 of the document, and there would have also been a lot of writing that happened that didn't touch anything approximating that document at all. It would have been something that was in her head. I mean, she's not here, I'm not going to speak for her, but in practice, when I've worked on things, I did a Worldwide Developers Conference presentation this year, and I did a lot of the working of that on that in the shower. And it's not because I've got a secret waterproof MacBook. It's that the kinds of things that I was manipulating and playing with, thinking about conceptually how I was going to reorder things, it was able to come to me anywhere. And so I think that if we were talking about reading and writing, there are the proximal sort of actions of encoding symbols to some enduring format. And I think even there are some innovations that virtual reality has the ability to offer us. But we also need to be more holistic about what writing constitutes and what it is we do when we make sense of a thing. And I think that's in that broader scope where we need to understand that virtual reality really has something to offer in terms of the arrangement, the juxtaposition, the selection, the scaling and scoping that we do implicitly by reading or trying to construct a document. And I would also add before that, sorry, Rhoda, that reading a cryptic text in a room where you have the dictionary is very different to one where you do not understand the words. Enigma was probably a pretty important, and Colossus was probably a pretty important sort of a case study in that. It was something that was going to ruin the Allied side there, and then it didn't because they could read it. So it might be useful for us to focus proximally on the actual sort of text encoding aspect of what we're doing when we're in there. But I would argue that it's going to be really difficult to do better than typist speed, 100+ characters, 100+ words a minute kind of capabilities that people have been able to construct for themselves over the last 100 years. And even if you talk about saying, okay, well, I've got a perfect dictation thing, then you're already expanding the scope of what it is to write. Because a lot of those secretaries and a lot of those people who were doing that dictation for you were also doing a non-trivial sort of human level intelligence amount of cleanup on the normal non-fluency of speech. Even if I feel like, and I guess I do feel like I'm talking intelligently today, if I were to look at the verbatim transcript, I would be embarrassed by it because of the non-fluency that naturally necessarily ensues from the way that we compose things when we're speaking off the cuff. And I've said this thing or something like it a lot of times. And so this isn't even my first go around. So it's in that context that, we need to be aware of what writing is and what reading is in terms of what we construct for ourselves, and recognize that this is an opportunity to be able to create those contexts as well as, the typey letter graphing and whatever else that normally accompanies it. Sorry, hopefully that was relevant.
No need to be sorry, Brandel, and thank you. Peter, just 1 second. The act of writing, one of the things I want to have Siri be able to take notes that go directly into an author document for me. Because you're right, in the shower, walking down the street, it's often easy you get a thought. And also, as Mark and I discovered when he was helping me edit my thesis, as we all know, but emotionally really came back, is editing is an incredibly different task to writing. Even when you're editing your own thing. I'm trying to finish a thing now and it's absolute a mess. However, just to mention a really brief thing from last week. In my software author, you do Command J, you have your journal. It's a normal author document, but you can write stuff and find it. It's hidden away, you can't accidentally delete it. I'm also adding Command I, not when selecting text obviously, for your ideas page. So the Notion there is you have something neat, you want to write it down, like Notion and all these fancy things do it. This is just an even super simpler. Did we just lose Brandel? We did. Oh no, there you are. Sorry, something moved on my screen. Right. So the idea is that you have a thought like, in order for text to be free, it has to be bounded. Boom, you write it there and then you can search later. You do that over time. To me, that's going to help me a lot because a lot of the things in my reminders is actually just thoughts, not actions. Now, here's the thing. What I plan to do as the next step is to allow the user, with their clear express consent, to specify that this should be used as context for their prompts. So when they select text in the future on something they have written and they say, can you suggest more? They can choose to have the AI include all of their fancy little thoughts to better give them a response to what it should be. Right? So care of feeding of AI in context of writing and reading will be an interesting topic. I just thought that was fun for me. Wow, very exciting. But in terms of coming to a close, and Peter, yes, I'll give you the mic in a second. I really think it would be great if we can at least pretend we have some strong opinions on the thing, what happens when I have done a writing should be inside. Should it be an entirely new thing? I mean, new things do happen. Obviously, change is hard and expensive. Should we use one of the ones that exists? Peter, please go ahead. And then I really, really want to see. Fabian, don't go without telling me what it. Oh, he's gone already. Okay. All right, Peter, but everyone else, please write down a preference for a format just to help us today get a little bit of a summation. Of course, this will go on forever.
Okay, I think one really useful distinction to have in our documents is whether we're dealing with a list or a set. Now, normally we assume that we're dealing with the list of words, in which case the order is significant, but a portion of a document like our visual meta really is a set and the order doesn't matter. It could be a set of visualization constraints where you want something to be bold, italic. If you want to be both bold and italic, whether we say bold first and italic second or italic first and bold second doesn't matter. You have essentially a set of typesetting constraints applied to something within the document. So you could have that, or for instance, the ideas thing could either be looked at as being the list of ideas in the sequence that they were entered, or you could treat the ideas as being a set of all of the ideas to just arbitrarily pluck them. And if we distinguish something as being a set, then the system is free to reorder them. So essentially, sometimes I care about order, sometimes I don't, and I think that would be a useful distinction to be able to capture in a document format. Also, there's a distinction between whether you're dealing with a source document or a generated target document created from the source. And there's no reason that the source documents have to be so hideously convoluted that only a computer system can deal with them. We can have a source document expressed in a quasi-natural language that is both rigorously parsable and comprehensible to someone who isn't a programmer. So you can have that source document, which could be, just maybe formalized statements. The house is red to represent a triple. And
Peter,
you can have a set of
Peter, this is all very interesting and worthwhile, but it's a little outside of documents. Can you maybe put a pin for a near future conversation on this? And also, of course, if you want to put an article in the book, that would be really, really cool.
Of course. But I just wanted to get the idea that we should be thinking both in terms of the document intended for the system to produce a presentation versus a document that's the result of everything the system knows, and the system, I guess, question is whether it's been augmented by the system or whether it's just the original direct manual entry of the author. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you. I see some comments here, and I just wanted to add the notion of accessibility is something I want to get rid of. Because I think that especially in XR, the fact that we're all different becomes much more relevant, and we should try to exploit, capture, and use that rather than, oh, you're within a certain threshold, therefore you're considered different. I think that's a ridiculousness we need to get rid of. Yeah, Mark.
I just wonder on the notion of the documents. I think where I'm sort of keep getting stuck is what it's trying to deliver. I just was in sort of reading and listening to things. I was reminded that actually one of the things is if you go to an academic conference, I know there are other forms of interchange and discussion, but if you go to a conference, actually one of the fun bits is that often the really good sort of paper presentations have nothing to do with the paper. They are not a parade of view graphs or bullet points. It's actually the author's actual real thought, or the thing that they didn't felt confident to say, on paper to be distributed around the world. But you get the sort of lightning rod of that. And what that sort of says is that shows the limitation actually of our existing communication format. Doesn't mean it's wrong. It's what we had, and we're looking at these new formats, and so the question is, well, how do we sort of capture that? What do we want the document to deliver? And it is difficult because the tools are just not mature enough. So we're sort of having to imagine it. And worse than that, we're talking about tools that we got to build with hard-edged coding tools, and what we actually want to produce with them are very unhard-edged sort of communication devices. So it's a definite challenge there. But I think that one of the difficulties in trying to pin down a document is to have some sense of the range of what we think it ought to be able to deliver, because that is going to have some direct interaction with what is a realistic choice. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, a brief answer to that, Mark, is it has to make every academic happy, and it has to make every opportunity possible. Ha ha ha. Carl.
So I'm wondering if that phenomenon that Mark just discussed is more an issue of the shortcomings of the standards or the tools or the document formatting, or more an issue of audience capture and culture, which is something that Matt Klein, one of the founders of Reddit, talks about, which is when you know your target audience, you will self-censor or modulate what it is that you share and communicate before you get any negative reaction to it. You will sort of try to head that off at the pass and make that change before, with the assumption that you're going to get negative markback on it. And that's an interesting phenomenon, but I'm not sure that that's something that we can change on like the tooling end, if that is what Mark is experiencing.
If I very quickly clarify for you, in fact, I was not intentionally, but I was so hinting at something else, which is where you can hear a presentation about a paper that basically appears to not reference the paper at all. It's talking about often the idea, the concept behind it. What you read there is the sort of stuff that said, no, I actually did this. I went and did all this work, and I measured all these things, and I produced all this stuff. But the idea that comes out of it, that sings through from it, which is often very difficult to write down. And the loveliest presentations either basically have no illustration at all, or maybe just have things like pictures used as placeholders for ideas. And there's that purity of communication. I mean, I know that's difficult because, again, you hit another aspect of communication where, of course, the more expressive and florid you get in your own language, possibly that's more difficult for those who are having to basically work through a loud transition, which is another thing we forget. But anyway, I just wanted to clarify that because I don't think it runs at all counter to what you said, and I think that's really useful to pick up the point about the sort of self-censorship and where that fits in the sort of the publication or the communication. But I hope that clarifies things. Thanks.
So I think we will continue this topic a few more Mondays. And it's nice when we go all over the place, as we're going to have to. But we also need to, at least I need to, produce something. We have the Future of Text book coming out in November and December, meaning preview in November for the symposium and then final in December to be shared. And yeah, it's going to be in PDF. But is that the only thing we should put it in, right? And if we have an XR amazing version of it, how is that the same publication or not? I'm not saying it has to be or not, but I do think that we who care about this issue and who are therefore innovators, we need to. I've looked at JSON and I absolutely hate it. Oh, sorry, JSON. I was confused there, Peter. No. We do use JSON. We use JSON for transmission in what we're building. Sorry, I shouldn't be reading messages when I'm talking. But at the end of the day, it has to be on something, right? And our community is currently, quote unquote, fighting with another community who has a lot of power and influence over the future of document formats. It's an association called MCA in backwards, so the video doesn't easily find it. They have their very specific ways of doing it, and we need to, we need to put stuff somewhere. I'm still okay-ish with PDF because of the durability and simplicity. And when it comes to metadata, metadata is text anyway. So it doesn't matter what the substrate is. But the little image that I put up here, just to have the headings way off on the side or the references and specific things and move things, it has to be reflowable text. It just absolutely cannot not be. Otherwise we are locked into that rectangle. So for the fun of it, shall we just pretend we've chosen a format today?
It's brought in a lot of useful material.
I think mute that one. Let me just say, Dave, if you had to pick one, what would it be? If I had to change my word processor to export in a different thing, what should it be? I think you're still muted.
I put in the chat my litmus test for this. It's something that meets some of the things we've been discussing to do with having some commonly interpretable core, but also extensibility, container, and so on. And then I applied that test to your list, and I wasn't quite sure what the answer was, but I was quite compelled by your description of EPUB earlier as something that attempts to do that.
Yeah, EPUB is intriguing, and looking at the comments here. Yeah, hang on, just reading. Yeah, the word extension somebody puts in here. Is that maybe how we should think about different documents, how to relate to each other? I mean, even on something like the ACM's digital library, you can choose to download in this or that. There are options for downloads. But maybe what we've come to today is more of a notion that they should know about each other. So if you downloaded the PDF or the HTML, it knows the other ones are there. So that if you're reading on a traditional device, put on your headset, the document knows, hang on, there's actually a this or that for the headset that is the same thing. Because I am not talking about manuscript formats like my own .liquid. I'm not talking about Word. Us developers can do whatever the heck we want in our own world. But once something has been given to the public through a digital repository or shared, that's when we need to have this kind of thing. Carl, please.
Yeah, along that same line, there's been a question a lot of XR developers have had, which is like, how do we transition, like, how do we give users wearing a headset like a traditional internet experience, go to a link, go to a website? Like, how do we make that presentation of that website turn into 3D magically, show assets, whatever? How do we make it more usable in the headset? And I think we already have precedent for that, which is whenever you log into a website on your phone, it knows that you're on a mobile device and it presents you with the mobile version of that website. And going forward, there just needs to be a XR or headset version of that website that also reads that you're on a headset. As far as your document format, I think that's a wonderful idea, which is when you go to log into that resource, whether it's based on a DOI number or some index, some known fixed identifying number, is you go to download that and it either prompts you or it checks your device and it sees whichever is the best, most compatible format for you and just hands it off to you.
I think that's interesting, and that doesn't necessarily need to be inside the document. I could imagine you try to open a Word document or PDF or whatever in a headset. I'm just trying to say back what I think you said. It says, oh, well, that's all very nice, but here is a more optimal version for this medium for you to use it. So it may be automatic, like smartphone, big screen, but it may also be referring to other things. One thing that I want to experiment with myself is to put see you later, Andrew, see you on Wednesday for work meeting. Is to, when you export to a PDF, the entire document is also encoded in the appendix without the formatting, and it's encoded in a way that is machine readable, so that if you want to have a flowing view, it is there. So that's going to be an interesting experience. The question is, that needs to be encoded in something too. Should it just be plain text with basic formatting, or should that actually be in HTML? But now Randall's going to help us with the 3D scene frameworks that these documents will be aware of in the future. So when you open it in what Andrew's doing in the future, then it can just explode into something more exciting. We have 1
future
minute
of-
left. Who wants to have the last few words?
Well, the future of the HTML of 3D is going to be HTML. I mean, that's and that will also presumably mean that to whatever extent folks who want to do EPUB may be able to leverage it as well. That's a really interesting question. I hadn't realized just how much the EPUB is just XHTML, so I'm really interested in leaning into understanding what is currently allowable and what makes sense to do within there, because unsurprisingly, because EPUB is HTML, Apple Books is WebKit. So you know that, and that, you know, the same is going to be the case on all the other platforms. And so it's it's sort of what I was saying about how, like, the answer is HTML. What is the question? But yeah, like that also doesn't preclude the wildly different distribution format, sort of distribution styles that EPUB versus a web browser has. So that's really exciting to dig into and play with.
So, Brandel, you're very much in favor of EPUB as one potential wrapper for these goodies.
It's a way of understanding that closure, and it might be something that even I'm in favor of HTML. I think there's no good reason that I've heard so far that HTML isn't the right thing, if not to use, then to turn into the thing to use. And I would rather do the work of pulling HTML toward the right choices for the future than to try to build something else from the ground up. I think EPUB could be a part of that. I'm not certain at this point of what it does and doesn't do, and how that sort of hits against various kind of security and security and privacy constraints and things like that. Like there are still real implementation problems associated with any transmission formats and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a really great place to start, and I'm interested in the EPUB side of HTML as well.
Fantastic. Peter?
Yeah, we also want to have a data format that can support embedded data in it. And for the newcomers, I'd recommend taking a look at Cyberspace First Steps if you haven't seen that book.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting.
And see you all on Wednesday.
Yeah, see you, whoever wants to come back, when you want to come back. As I said, it's all very casual. I'm very grateful for today. Please DM me your email or whatever contact, so then I will distribute this. Of course, feel free to say no and so on. Yuri, you put your hand down. Please put it back up if you have a final word.
Yeah, again, answering your question, how to wrap Future of Text Volume 4, or whichever it is now. I think that in 5, cool. I think that in 2024, it should be, if you want it to be read by people, you should go to where people are, and it's HTML browsers. You can try EPUB. It's not a long stretch from HTML, but it's more limiting. It doesn't allow a lot of things which you already get in HTML. But if you want to showcase VR, AR, or XR, then it should be something else probably. But like, cannot comment there. I'm interested in more wider adoption of text, and where I can access it from devices I have here and now.
Yeah, that's a good point. And on the wider access of text point, we will finish for today. And thank you all very, very much for today. Bye for now. Bye.
Bye-bye.